Okay, today we're going to have a look at the ZiboMod 737-800x in X-Plane 11.5. I upgraded it recently to the latest build to see what was different, and it turns out some of the procedures around the cabin have changed a little bit. They've become a little bit more realistic, and it kind of makes more sense when you look at the various gauges and what's going on. So we're going to start the plane up from cold and dark on the tarmac, and we're not going to use ground power, we're just going to use batteries, so I can explain a few things along the way. So first thing we do is switch the batteries on, and that gives us some power throughout the aeroplane. So if we go and look at standby power, in both cases we can see we're generating 99 volts AC and 24 volts DC. So the first thing we're going to need to do to get off of battery, so we're not just discharging the battery, we can see what we're discharging, by the way. If we roll this around to bat on this knob, we can see there's a draw of 5.6. I imagine that's just to set the, to run the computers. First thing we're going to do then is turn the APU on. So we move it to on, and you will see a low oil pressure light come on. And then after a few seconds, we're going to move it to start and hold it on start for a good few seconds, and you can see the exhaust gas temperature at the top left of the switch has started rolling around. You generally hold it on start until it gets past 2 and then let go. It will climb up towards 8 on its own and then begin to fall down. So this exhaust gas, the APU, if you weren't aware, is a small jet engine in the rear of the aircraft. You'll notice on 737s there's a hole in the back of the tail, and that's the exhaust for the APU. So you can see it's dropping down. Once it is providing power, the light in the centre of bus transfer will light up, and you can see it just has APU gen off bus. So that means that power is available from the APU generator, but we're not using it. It's off bus at the moment. So we can flick these two switches down below the APU gen light to transfer power to the APU. So we're now letting the APU provide power to the plane's systems. And if we come up here and we switch this knob round to APU gen, we can see that we're generating 113 volts. Does that make sense? On AC, I should say. So now we have the APU up and running. We're obviously, if we hadn't got on with doing that, we would have heard an alarm from the battery that we were still drawing current. So the first thing we're going to do now we have electricity on the aircraft is go and align the inertial navigation system, the IRS system. So you switch both of these to nav, and they will come up and say align, which means that it's setting the system up basically. It uses gyros to do it, because planes don't rely just on GPS, they also use gyros to do inertial navigation. And that tells you, if you turn this knob around to the status setting, it tells you how many minutes until it's going to be completed doing all of its configuration. So if we look further back down, the panel just above the pilot's heads, we can now go and do some other bits and pieces. It's worth noting, if you look at this duct pressure over here, I'm going to turn the APU bleed on now, and you will see the pressure available. So this is basically taking air pressure from the APU and making it available to the aircraft. So you can see it's built up a pressure of nearly 40. Is that in bar? No, it's PSI. So 40 PSI. That is the amount of pressure you need to spin the engines up. Look what happens though if I turn on the cabin pressurization and air conditioning system. If I put the packs on, which does the air conditioning, we lose some pressure. Yeah? So if I go and turn the packs on, I won't be able to spin the engines up. So I'll turn that back off, and you'll see the pressure climb back up. Okay, so next thing to do, ideally, is turn the engines on. Before we can do that, we need fuel. So we're going to turn the fuel pumps on. Okay. We don't need the hydraulic pumps yet, because they provide power to the, or they provide the control of the control surfaces. See, the hydraulics. Makes sense, doesn't it? So the first thing we're going to do to turn the engines on, if we come and down, we'll come back to the pilot seat and look across to do this. There's two switches here. There's GRD. We're going to switch the starter for engine number 2 to GRD, which will start the engine spinning up. And if we look down now on this display, we can see the N2 number, the gas turbine percentage, is increasing. The number is a percentage of nominal, so 100% is the engine going flat out. When it gets to 25%, so it's being driven by the compressed air at the moment from the APU. When it gets to 25% of speed, we can advance the throttle for engine number 2 to idle, and it will accelerate past 25%, and you will see the exhaust gas temperature is raising for engine number 2, and the N1 percentage is increasing. This is the turbofan speed, and again is a percentage of nominal, or 100%, and you can see the fuel flow is increasing as well. If we quickly look up above our head, you will see the knob for the starter has switched back all on its own. I didn't touch that. So now we're going to start engine number 1. So we switch the starter to GRD for engine number 1. We look down here and we can see the N2 percentage is increasing, so the gas turbine is spinning up. And again, when it gets to 25%, we can advance the throttle for engine number 1 to idle. 24, 25, and we've advanced the throttle to idle. It will accelerate past 25. The exhaust gas temperature is raising, and the N1 percentage is increasing as well, the turbofan. And again, we can keep an eye on this knob. It will fall back to auto all on its own. So if we spin the camera around, so we're just looking at this panel for the next few moments. So we now have the engines are up and running. So they are generating power. So what we can do is transfer power generation away from the APU to the engines. So we're going to do the right engine and the left engine. Okay, now that has automatically switched off the APU. It's switched the crossfeed over from the APU to the engine, so we don't have to turn off the APU gen switches, but we can just turn off the APU at this point, and we can turn off the APU bleed. Okay, and you can see the duct pressure has dropped, because obviously it's the APU provides more pressure than the jet engines do, because they don't have to start themselves, if that makes sense. We can now turn the packs on. So again, you'll see that drop even further, but it only has to provide enough pressure, if you think about it, to pressurize the cabin. And you can tune that, and it's kind of a double functions going on here. You've got the heating of the cabin air and the pressurization. So you can set the altitude you're going to be flying at. Again, there's a lot more to this than I'm actually explaining. I'm just kind of a very quick overview. We can switch the emergency exit lights to armed and close the lid on it. We can close the lid on the battery switch over there. We can turn on the window heats. We can turn on the heating of the probes. We can turn on the yaw dampers. We can now turn on the hydraulic pumps. Everything's up and running. So we're pretty much there. If we go and look overhead, we've got 3 minutes still to go on the IRS alignment. But while we're waiting for that, we could look down in the cockpit. We can see it's just the only warning light now is IRS. It's also warning us over here that the FMC has something to deal with. So if we go into the FMC, it's the position initialization basically. So we have to go into next page, pick up the GPS from the GPS settings, which will put it into the scratch pad. This previous page, drop the scratch pad into the IRS position. We can set our reference airport if we want to, so EGSS, we're at Stansted. I'm not sure of the gate number, doesn't matter. And again, at this point you can go and program your route. So you could, EGSS is in the scratch pad because I set it as my reference airport, and say we were going to Edinburgh, for example, it would be EGPH. And again, I'm not going to do the whole of this process. Oh, I suppose I could. I'm here anyway and we're waiting for a couple of minutes. So to fill in the gross weight, we're going to go over to AviTab, look in the fuel weight and balance, go to payload. Here's our gross weight in, so we need it in thousands, so it's 111.1. So we switch back to the FMC, 111.1. Cruising altitude, say we were going to fly at, I don't know, 25,000 feet, so that would be flight level 250. Reserves, £5,000 we want left over. Cost index. The cost index is the result of a formula that calculates how aggressively the aircraft can climb and how aggressively it can accelerate. N1 limit, we can go straight past that. We can set flaps 5 for takeoff. We can transfer the calculated rotate speeds based on what we've told the aircraft so far. We can go and set the departure. So we say, well, maybe we're going to take off from runway 22. I'm not actually going to do the takeoff. Maybe we were going to do a SID as well. We can go to the route and activate it and execute that. We could go to the arrival at Edinburgh and we could say we're going to arrive at maybe runway 6 and we're going to use star EDN2E. I don't even know what this looks like, I'm just choosing it. And then the last thing we would do is go and look in the legs, and obviously we can see there's discontinuity because we haven't got a complete route anyway. But if you want to quickly get rid of a discontinuity, you select the waypoint below the discontinuity and then select the discontinuity, and what it does is it shifts everything up, yeah, and then execute that to make the change. So let's go and look, and yeah, the IRS system switched on now, so it's all up and running. Something else that's worth looking at, just as a bit of a point of interest, if you switch the display for this map over to plan mode, you get a step button appears down at the bottom corner. So let's zoom in to show this happening. So what step will do is we'll go through the flight plan step by step, so you get to have a look at it. So it's quite useful just to verify your flight plan. Yeah. So if you press it again, it will cycle back to the start. But again, normally in a flight you'd be leaving that in map mode, wouldn't you? So there we go, we've got the airplane up and running. I guess the next thing to do is, if we were taking off from runway 22, we would go and change our heading round to 220, which we can do quickly in here to get it ready for the runway basically. What else might we do? We might go and increase the auto throttle target speed, so sort of 220 knots, whatever. You'd be looking at your standard instrument departure at this point to find out what speed you need to be flying at. Flight directors on, for example. You might be tuning your comm radios and your nav radios if you needed to, and there's your parking brake and you're ready to go basically. So yeah, that's kind of the startup sequence for the 737. You've got lights down here, by the way. It's pretty straightforward actually. But yeah, startup for the 737-800x in X-Plane 11.5, and this was recorded in November 2020 using the latest build. So if you get stuck, you might want to watch back through this to see what I did. Okay, I'm going to stop the video there.